It's very famously known that in the times of Jahiliyyah, people would bury their daughters alive. And there's many accounts of this before the Prophet ﷺ came. But one of the most striking and the most emotional accounts of such depravity was a man who had a girl born in his house, and he wasn't happy about it. But rather than killing her as they would immediately, he allowed her to grow up to the age of 5 and 6, such a tender age. And as they nourished and nurtured this young girl, the time eventually came where he was going to carry out such a horrific deed, which many years later he would recount and tell the Prophet ﷺ. This man, his daughter was 6 years old, and he promised to take her out on a day out with her father. She was very excited about this, and he takes her out to the desert areas, and she's very excited, and she has done her hair, and she is wearing new clothes, very excited to be going out with her father. Eventually, when they reach the destination which he had in mind, he begins to dig up the soil, and she starts to help him in this endeavor, not realizing the plan which he has in mind. So they begin to dig the ground using their bare hands, and there she is in the middle of the desert, in the blazing heat of Arabia, perspirating and moving her hair out the way so she can continue with this activity with her father, not realizing that a gruesome end is coming her way. As the deep hole becomes even bigger, eventually the father pushes the daughter in. And she's of course hurt as she enters the hole, and she looks from 6 feet beneath the earth, looking above the surface of the earth towards her father, not realizing and trying to make out from his facial expressions whether he is angry with her. And she begins to plead with him. However, her pleading falls on deaf ears, as he then begins to smother her with the soil. She then begins to cry, and she says to her father, "Did I do something to harm you? Did I do something to upset you?" And he doesn't listen to her. He continues on this barbaric rampage, and he continues to smother her with soil until eventually her screams and her noise becomes muffled to the point where there's pin drop silence once again in the desert. He buried his daughter alive, and off he went without showing any remorse whatsoever. He went back to his home in Mecca. When he later recounted this same story to the Prophet ﷺ, he wept, and the Prophet ﷺ wept until their beards were soaked in tears. And the Prophet ﷺ said to him, "Was there no mercy in your heart when you did this? How could you do such a horrific crime? You buried your daughter alive." And this was the norm. Pre-Islam, this was the norm. It was only when the Prophet ﷺ came and gave glad tidings to whosoever has a daughter and looks after her, clothes her, feeds her, gets her married, that he will be with the Prophet ﷺ like this, and showed his ummah with his noble fingers. This is how close that person will be with the Prophet ﷺ.